All right, let's jump right in. We've all had those weeks, the ones where you just feel completely and utterly drained. But today, we're going to look really closely at why your exhaustion might actually be a measurable biological syndrome and not just a run-of-the-mill stressful week. We're zeroing in on the structural causes of burnout. We'll be looking at the hard science of what is actually happening in your brain and body, and honestly, more importantly, what's happening in your workplace.
So it's a question we have to ask right up front. Is burnout literally just a fancy word for being tired? Think about a time when you found yourself just staring blankly at your laptop, totally unable to start a task. Or maybe you've wondered why the work that you used to handle with total ease now feels genuinely impossible to get through. It is incredibly frustrating when caring about the outcome of your work suddenly feels like it's happening at a distance. If you've experienced this, you know deep down that it's not just about needing a nap. And guess what? Occupational health research actually backs you up on this.
To truly understand what's happening to you, we first have to draw a hard line between clinical burnout and just ordinary fatigue. Occupational health researchers define burnout as a syndrome with three very specific, measurable markers. First up, there's emotional exhaustion. That's the one we're probably all the most familiar with, but it doesn't stop there. The second marker is depersonalization, or a really profound cynicism toward the actual work you're doing. And the third is a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. Now, this distinction is absolutely crucial because it proves burnout isn't just this vague feeling of being overwhelmed. It involves a fundamental shift in how you relate to your job, which is a whole different ballgame than just having a tiring week.
Beneath all those psychological symptoms is a physiological reality that's directly tied to your body's stress response system. Normally, your hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands are designed for short-term activation. They give you this temporary biological surge to handle an acute challenge. Like dodging a speeding car or hitting a sudden crazy deadline. And then, crucially, they return to a baseline state of calm. But under chronic activation, that system gets sustained and overactivated without adequate recovery. Basically, the system never gets a signal to power down.
That prolonged overactivation fundamentally alters our biology, leading to what researchers actually call blunted and dysregulated cortisol patterns. Now, this is a really important nuance. Burnout isn't simply a matter of having too much cortisol flooding your system. Research shows that over time, the stress response system becomes completely dysregulated, and your cortisol patterns can actually become blunted or flattened out. It is a complex physiological breakdown. This is exactly why simply taking a weekend to relax or soaking in a bubble bath doesn't just magically cure burnout. Your biology has literally been altered by sustained activation.
And this brings us to a really fascinating shift in how your brain processes motivation. When you complete a task perfectly but you feel absolutely nothing, it's not because you suddenly lost your edge. As the research notes, your competence hasn't changed, but your reward system has. Research on chronic stress shows that the brain's dopamine signaling circuits actually become less responsive. This blunted reward system perfectly explains the cynicism and that emotional distance we talked about earlier. Your competence is exactly the same, but your brain's ability to feel satisfaction has been biologically muted by unresolved stress.
Okay, so if the brain and the body's stress systems are physically changing, how do we fix it? And why isn't a quick wellness app enough to cure us? Let's look at how the World Health Organization defines this. They call burnout an occupational phenomenon resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. The wording here is so deliberate and so incredibly important. By formally recognizing it as an occupational phenomenon, the WHO clearly places the weight on unmanaged environmental conditions, not on a lack of personal resilience. It explicitly states that the stress has not been successfully managed, which points directly back to the workplace conditions themselves, rather than just suggesting you need to be a bit tougher.
This builds the case for where our solutions actually need to come from. Look, individual interventions like meditation apps, wellness perks, and general stress reduction techniques, they are genuinely helpful for a lot of people. But research has found that when the underlying cause is chronic structural overload, organizational changes that address workload, autonomy, and structural demands have significantly larger effects than individual coping strategies. Think about it. If your workplace is chronically understaffed or demands a totally impossible workload, offering a free meditation app isn't going to fix the underlying structural driver of your biological stress. It's just putting a Band-Aid on a broken system.
So if we know it's a structural problem that literally alters our biology, how do we get better? Well, the research points to a combination of individual rest and structural transformation, breaking it down into 3 key steps. First, you need sustained periods of recovery time without stress activation. Because of that cortisol dysregulation we covered earlier, just working slightly shorter individual days isn't enough while the underlying chronic pattern continues.
You need sustained time away to really reset that system. Second, you absolutely have to address the structural sources of the chronic overload. Workload, lack of autonomy, and a lack of role clarity are massive risk factors. If you don't change these, any stress reduction techniques you try to apply won't hold up for long. And third, because your dopamine circuits have been blunted, you have to intentionally rebuild small moments of genuine reward. You have to deliberately reintroduce activities that reliably produce satisfaction before the burnout set in, to gradually, slowly, re-engage that reward system.
And that brings us to the ultimate summary of the research. You have to address the conditions, not just the symptoms. Now, none of this means that individual actions, like taking some time off, don't matter. They absolutely do. But the most effective response is a dual approach. You have to facilitate your own biological and psychological recovery while simultaneously addressing the actual structural conditions that produce the chronic stress in the very first place. You simply cannot out-meditate a structurally broken and overloaded job. It just doesn't work long-term.
Which leaves us with this final, vital question to reflect on. If burnout is structural, are we trying to fix a broken environment by just asking individuals to be more resilient? Burnout was never just being really stressed or failing to manage your time well. It's a measurable biological syndrome born from unmanaged environments. As you move forward and look at your own workplace dynamics, I really want you to challenge how you view structural overload. Remember, true recovery requires addressing the root conditions, not just managing the symptoms. Thank you so much for joining me for this, and I hope this empowers you to see your exhaustion in a whole new scientific light.